the circle that starts challenging that notion of saying a girl can do more than what a boy can do. We've actually seen that child marriage was about 27% in the states we work. In the communities we work was less than 1%. We saw that school dropout ratio from 40% came down to about 15%. That basically means almost 85% girls in the communities we work were actually going to school. We've seen similarly indicators around health, around gender-based violence. And I think that's what gave us hope.
100 connected minds for human flourishing.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you might be joining us on this beautiful planet. Welcome and thank you for being with us. I am Hanneke Mackie. I am joining from sunny Joburg, South Africa, and I represent BuzzKids. As the founder of BuzzKids, we work with children using the arts to learn through play and to develop their very crucial 21st century skills. We're very, very excited to introduce you to our special guests of honor for today in this conversation. We're spotlighting two very powerful education innovations that are expanding opportunity and agency for girls across different contexts and continents and with a wide, wide reach. The first is the Girl Icon program from the Milaan Foundation in India that equips adolescent to mentor peers, adolescent girls, and they mentor their peers, they lead community action and challenge deep-rooted norms around education, gender, and opportunity. The program has empowered more than 100,000 girls directly, and they have, very impressively, influenced nearly 1 million people through their community-led change. It's very impressive. The second program represented here, the Girl Boss program from Launch Girls. It's a future-ready entrepreneurship initiative supporting young women to transition from school into work, enterprise, or higher education. And this program, also super impressively, has reached more than 25,000 girls directly across 16 countries, equipping them with the confidence and skills and the pathways to economic participation. And who are these heroes behind these beautiful programs and innovations? I'm honored to be joined by these leaders behind the movement. Surendra Pratap Singh, he is the co-founder and CEO of Milaan, the Milaan Foundation. And then I have Neha Sahu, co-founder, co-CEO of Launch Girls. Both innovations have been recognized by 100, the global collection, which means that they are recognized as two of the world's most scalable, innovative education solutions on the planet, not a small victory at all. I'd like to start by throwing a couple of questions out for us to grab onto, and feel free to just join in the conversation. I'd like both of you, Neha and Narendra, to tell our listeners where exactly in the world you are right now and where you work. And then I'd like you to take us into the why that led you to the work that you do.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with Haneke and, of course, Dhirendra. I am in Goa, India. That's where I live. But Launch Girls and Girl Boss operate in India and also across 15 odd countries in the African continent. So we do have a remote team, a global team, and I work closely with the center.
Hello, everyone. I am actually based out of Michigan in the United States, but most of my work is in India. I'm very new to the United States, but we work into the two states of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh in India.
Amazing. And can we get into that chat, guys, around the motivation of what made you start the organizations and the projects that you're currently working in?
Absolutely. I think 15 years into the work I've been doing, I realized that I could have very easily been a girl myself who didn't make it in life. And I'll tell you why, right? My parents came from minority communities and semi-rural parts of India. And by most, standard structural measures and norms, it would have been very easy for me to just follow a very narrow and restricted pathway for my future and my life. But I got something from my parents and my family that most girls don't get, just the belief to do whatever I wanted to do and be different. And in addition to that, I also was really, really lucky to have peers, networks of supporters, and people who really showed me what was possible. And this combination truly allowed me to actually translate all of my academic education into independence and financial autonomy for myself as a woman right now. But over time, what I realize is that this has been a very rare piece, and it still is in 2026 as we talk right now. And this rarity for adolescent girls becoming young women across the global south, whether we were talking about South Asia, India in particular, countries across Africa, countries across Latin America. And that's a really, really unfortunate truth. So before actually starting Launch Girls with my co-founder, I spent 10 years building my first nonprofit, bringing girls and boys to play a sport, to develop life skills and imagine just what their future would look like. And there were a lot of football victories, there were a lot of graduations, there was a lot of resilience over these 10 years. And then I went back to track what had happened to the girls who completed these programs after 6, 7, 8 years. And I was actually devastated. What I realized was these girls, despite being ambitious, despite doing academically well, despite going to school regularly, were ending up in the same place as a lot of their mothers. That is, in unpaid work, absolutely little to no economic mobility, or getting married off or pulled out of education altogether. And that's where I realized that something was really off. And I met Avril, my co founder now. She had arrived at the same conclusion about girls hitting this invisible wall despite going to school and completing 10th grade. And the answer was there in front of us, right? This wall existed because of gender. There were families who thought about norms, social norms, patriarchal norms, thought about finances and prioritizing boys. There was an absolute lack of pathways for opportunities. So we got into the business of talking to girls, and it was almost like girls said they didn't know where to go next, they didn't know who to ask next, and they had no idea how to advocate for themselves or even speak for themselves. And that's when we said that this isn't a simple skills gap or an education gap. This is an entire systems failure as we were seeing it for girls, at generations of girls. And that's when we started building Launch Girls together, April and I, to really build that ecosystem that should have existed long ago but wasn't in place.
Wow, that is so inspiring, and it took me back. I don't think this is something I've ever shared on this podcast, but I did my major in gender studies at the University of Cape Town, and I work in the arts space, but very similarly, so moved by what is that very magical ingredient that isn't education, money, position, something else that um, can be a barrier for people, but especially women. What is that? In my world, we work a lot around confidence and social skills. I'll share more, but I'm so touched by your work, especially for girls. So inspiring. And I guess that's the thread with Surendra, your work, is that it's also focused on young women and girls. So share with us the passion around what led you to your work, as so inspiring Naya has just shared.
Thanks, Annika. I think there was when Neha was talking about the why, and there was many points where I could actually connect to the why. So I also came from a rural community in Uttar Pradesh. My dad actually went into the army as a soldier because agriculture was just not enough. My mother never got to complete her secondary education. She was married at 17. She had 3 kids by 21. But at the same time, there was an aspiration within the family to drive that intergenerational change. And therefore, all three of us did pretty well. Otherwise, sometimes I joke about it, but the reality is my sister is the one who makes most of the money. And and therefore, I think from the very beginning, there was this notion of the power of education to really drive intergenerational change. And so, frankly, my work 18 years back started with just a pure education program, which is literally a school that we still run in rural Sitapur with about 800 plus kids. And as we were building the school, bringing more and more children into the school, we were realizing that there were less girls that's coming into the school. And mind it, it's a free school. And then also there's less girls that are kind of coming into, even when we were able to mobilize girls to enroll into the school, the attendance was an issue. I think this was the time when I got very interested to really understand the mathematics around it. I studied mathematics, Hanika. So I look at everything from a numbers game, and it really helps me to understand the story. And I think when we were looking at the story, it was interesting to see that India being home to about 120 million plus girls, we are still home to the largest number of child brides in the world. The school dropout rates is almost about 40%. So I think it got me very interested to really understand like what's happening there. Why are we not able to move forward, right? And simultaneously, I think the one answer I was getting when I was talking to community was just around money. And they were like, oh, we don't have enough money, so we don't send our daughters to school. So we ran a huge program for school dropout girls, and we said it'll be completely free. All you have to do is to send your daughters to this place for about 6 hours. We'll provide lunch, we'll provide books, we'll do all of that stuff, right? The working assumption was you said money is an issue, we'll solve it with, you know, free resources. And believe me and my team struggled. We struggled to work with these school dropout girls because girls who've never been to school, we wanted them to clear high school in a 5-year program, but they would not just come to the center. And we would see, like, for every slightest excuse, even if they're there in the center, somebody will come and call them. Your uncle has come from this village, so we need somebody to help out in the kitchen. Today is the farming season. And I think in that complexity is where we started going more and more deep. And I said, it's not about the money, it's not about the thing. There is something much more deeper that we need to unearth. And I think that's where my personal, I think, learning around the idea of gender sensitization or like the restrictions that just being a girl meant for them. And then I think the question we were really asking was saying, how do you really change the mindset? Because it is a mindset question, right? And simultaneously, there was something very interesting was happening in India too, right? Like there is a lot of media campaigning around educating girls. The school enrollment rates actually at the primary level has gone up to about 98%, but you're seeing the graduation levels at 55, 60%. So what was really happening? I think that was a very good question that we were asking ourselves. And a couple of things that kind of came into from our discussions. And I also want to highlight that most of our work is into like villages in remote parts of the country. So my narratives is actually driven from there. I think the first thing we saw was that marriage was looked as the ultimate objective of life for a girl, right? Like from the day she's born, the parents are only thinking about her marriage. We need to save for the marriage. We need to look at the boyfriend community. And then I think the sooner you get her married, the one less person you have to feed in the family. So there was this kind of narrative. But the second thing I think what we were seeing was that because of the media narratives, parents somewhere down the line were at a thing that, okay, it's a good idea to educate girls. They were, we didn't have to sell that. But they don't had no idea what happens when you educate it because they had not seen anything around that. And so this is where exactly the Girl Icon program and the Milaan was basically, we reinvented everything and we said, if we could potentially showcase and we can bring stories of what happens when you educate girls and stories not from the urban communities and not from the elite, but the stories from the grassroots, it'll be a long journey. Can we build the first engineer in that village? Can we build the first doctor in the village? Can we build the first social worker in the village? And I think this entire building role models is where the Girl Icon program is born. And in the last 10 years, I think we've seen how people's mindset have changed, how the same communities where at one moment of time I have to, I literally had to sit down with them and convince them to say like, there is school beyond grade 6. Like just because your village has a school beyond till grade 6 doesn't mean the schooling stops there. 2 girls graduating from college from the same village. So it's been a journey. And yeah, that's why we do what we do.
So impressive, and definitely so glad that I'm here to take part in this conversation, because I think sometimes there's such a divide between the developed and the developing world, especially countries like Brazil, South Africa, India, where there is parts of the country racing ahead, absolutely part of the AI revolution, absolutely developed. And because the rate of change is so fast, those that are left behind are almost in a time warp bubble, because you've both described basically a need for a paradigm shift to occur in culture. And I loved how you described it, Naya, like we looked at all the boxes, which, what can we address? What can we shift? What can we change? Where do we push and pull to to help change this thing. And that is just a societal norm, as you described, Narendra, when the uncle comes and it's season on the farm now to sow or to plow, and the girl must just go. I would love to know a little bit more about practical, on the ground, boots on the ground.
Sure. I'm going to preface this by saying, everything that I started by saying my inspiration was for what happens after school, after education, because the gap that we're trying to solve for is that gap when an adolescent girl, a teenage girl at 13, 14, through becoming a young woman at 24. This is like critical transition time, right? Where there are life changes, decision making. You're becoming an adult and you have to manage finances or never get to manage it, right? It's that gap that we are looking at. And everything at that time actually is qualified by what Dhirendra and folks at Girl Icon do. Education is critical till then. And then when we come in, I'll just underline what are the gaps we are solving. One is confidence and agency. Haneke, you spoke to this. Second is just a skills gap, right? Third is a support systems gap. There are no support systems as we see them. There are no mentors, there are no family, there are no peers supporting. And the fourth, sorry, is what I call this equity gap, right? That's where your norms come in. That's how all of society functions together and packages their belief systems and puts them on this girl. That's what it looks like. So what we did was in 2020, when we started off, it was a pandemic, let me remind you. So we didn't plan to start in the pandemic. We started a little bit earlier. Pandemic hit us. So we ran this survey with 550 odd girls across 13 countries, an online survey to understand what are their needs, what are their wants, what's stopping them, what are their dreams. And we ran a little bit of survey with also educators to understand what's stopping girls. Do they know how to help girls, support girls? And we got some kind of data from there that got us to start our first online pilot with 150 girls representing 13 countries. And we came up with this Girl Boss Business Program. Yeah, big lessons. Of course, we saw that girls needed skills. What we were pitching was way too high level because they don't have basic confidence to get agency. These were girls who were 16, 17, 18, and 20, and we assumed they knew so much already. Nothing. So we are like, wow, we need to start 10 steps behind. So Girl Boss Business absolutely didn't work. But the other big lessons that came out were agency, in-person relationships, and mentorship were the real true accelerators. And you need to take this programming in person. So we never thought of it as being digital, but that was, proof that you have to be in person working with these girls where they are. And that led us to actually choose how do we program, and we chose entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurial education is the term for it, for those who are familiar. Not because we want every girl coming out of Girl Boss to become an entrepreneur, absolutely not. But because entrepreneurship, one, was not as resource intensive as coding or STEM or STEAM. Most of the girls, even we were working with, were girls who were coming from marginalization of multiple sorts, right? They're coming from a religious minority, they're coming from tribes, they're coming from rural parts. So let alone internet, they don't even have a device to use internet, right? A phone. So you can't use coding and STEM. So we said entrepreneurship, and the beauty of it would be that girls would imagine, create, test, and adapt. And we are doing something by giving these girls this ability to create. They are decision makers, problem solvers, and builders. So that was the first unique point that we brought in and tried. And then second, we said we just don't want to and we cannot focus only on a girl. Both Avril and I had actually led our first organizations. And Avril is also a gender expert. She studied gender studies. I did it through my work. So when we came together, we were like, this problem is massive. India has 120 million adolescent girls, like Dhirendra said. But if you look at the global south, you're talking about 310 million, right? And we were very intrigued by this universality of lack of mentorship and lack of pathways. So we said, how do we reach as many girls as possible and solve for this 80% universality of lack of mentors, lack of next steps, lack of confidence, lack of career readiness skills? So we decided that we would not program ourselves, but we would build capacity of two kinds of partners. One is grassroots NGOs, community-based NGOs, and we did this and still do it across Africa. And two, in India, we said, let's learn some systems change and scale lessons and work directly with governments or with partners who work with governments. So these are the two kinds of partners we work with. And what do we do? What does this look like? For a lot of African countries, we are across Rwanda, Kenya, Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria, and so on. What we do is we have a toolkit, a Girl Boss toolkit, and these partners get onboarded. Once they sign up, there's a selection process, vetting process. They get an onboarding system. There's a program manager, POC, point of contact that they assign. They recruit their facilitators. We train their facilitators online. We give them all the content. And then we do handholding support, right, for them as they deliver these programs in person for their girls. And these partners could be NGOs working in schools, working in communities. The range of young women and adolescent girls they serve is phenomenal. And that's where I get my energy from. There are girls from refugee camps. There are single mothers at 16 who want a second chance at life. There are survivors of gender based violence. There are just girls in cities, right, who don't know what to do next. So I think we get to really work with some brilliant NGOs, no matter how small or how big, working with women in need, and we get to just provide everything for them. We also build their capacity on monitoring and evaluation, give them the entire toolkit. And over a 3-year period, the idea is that they can totally own this programming. They become experts themselves. But even to design the program, we as a team at Launch Girls never have the answers for what is amazing for Kenya, what's amazing for Rwanda, right? So that's where the co-creation comes in. When I said 80% is what we're looking at, what are these frameworks? What's the research? What's best in practice for future of work for a girl in remote India or remote Kenya? The local context, the level at which you pitch to a girl what she needs is coming from these girls themselves sitting in rural Kenya, from the teachers themselves who've been part of the system, not us, right? So that's where the co-creation with girl squads and facilitator squads, we call them girl boss advisors in the program, comes in. And that's what a lot of the work in Africa today looks like. In India, it's a little bit different. There's a state of Telangana, South India, where we directly partner with the government, and this is the higher education department. What that means is undergraduate colleges. So we go to girls, irrespective of what they're studying. They could be studying commerce, arts, science, and what we're trying to work on with the government is creating a course credit for career readiness and future pathways for girls and women in specific, right? So these are 17 through 21-year-old young women in these colleges. Pretty much 90 to 95% are coming from marginalized, underserved backgrounds. And there are different types of marginalization here, right? Some are from tribes, some are from backward classes in India. There are people from really, really rural spaces. And most of them are first time learners, first generation college goers. And with the government, we're trying to see how does this get embedded in the education system as a work readiness course, but really looking at how do you serve women with one, not only the work readiness skills, but two, along with that, agency. And we like to call it a combination of personal and economic agency. And three, the support systems. So how do you structurally teach how to build your own support network, right? Your peer network, your mentor network, your advisors, your teachers. So we're doing this as a structured course. And then we bring in families and boys in this journey, right? So we do workshops for them. We engage them in events because seeing is believing. We started off early on in our earlier years, not involving the families, and realized, boom, you prepare a girl, she goes back to her family, everything you've done has no effect, right? And that was sad. So that's what it looks like in India. And what this brings me to is just to outline that as a result of this Girl Boss programming, what we are trying to do is see that the end of Girl Boss, which is a progression in Africa, partners may choose to start with a basics program, go into clubs, which are totally girl led. They come up with community projects, solve for challenges, applying entrepreneurial mindsets and skills. And then something like professional, where they come up with a business idea and a business plan. In India, it's a very similar trajectory over 3 years of undergraduation, but more structured, like 30 hours of a course, like any other course you would do in a college. And in India, they're getting an option again by the 3rd year of college. You get to pick an employment track or an entrepreneurship track. So why we do all this is so that at the end of this, each and every woman is equipped to literally take decisions for her life, including economic and financial decisions, and pivot whether she chooses to get married, whether she wants to have a child, whether she shifts her location of stay. She's able to pivot in life, and that's the goal for us, right? We want them to have this entire foundational toolkit for life, more like a phenomenal weapon, whether she's going to Mars or Pluto to use everywhere in life. And this literally looks like women owning their futures by choosing to start a business or starting to work. Type of business, type of employment absolutely doesn't matter, right? She could be running a small grocery store. She could be running an AI business in a city. She could be working as a data analyst, as a lot of our girls have done. She could be working at a science lab, or she could be, collecting blood samples as a lab technician, but really giving them that dignity of work no matter where they come from and contextualize experience with our partners.
I mean, it comes out of the mouth so easily to say, wow, that's impressive. But wow, that's impressive. It really, really is. And I want to say that I mean that sincerely. And Neha, you tell the story so beautifully. And I think that's so important in this podcast setting. And we're going to pass on to Jirendra to do the same, Jirendra to do the same. But it really paints such a vivid picture of the entire process in the pipeline of how you support these women. And I'm going to be very excited to see also longitudinally as you kind of go over decades when you can look back and see what does this generationally start to do for women. It's something that speaks very closely to my heart. When you started talking about building things like agency confidence, I instantly thought about what we do and how difficult it is to quantify some of those things, but that if it's missing that ingredient, you definitely see a woman's journey be so different. So I'd love to go into more detail of that soon, but let's give Jirendra a chance. And as a last point to that, Neha, I do want to say impressive all the government support and institutional support you've managed to gain. That must have, I mean, it doesn't happen by itself. I'm super impressed on behalf of everyone that you touch. Jirendra, share with us how your and Girl Boss, such a cool name. Share your program for us in a little bit of detail to help us feel and taste it.
Sure. I think, again, Neha picked up a couple of things that really build the structure of our programming too. So our program is called as the Girl Icon Program. As I'd mentioned earlier, the idea was to say, how do you challenge gender norms, gender regressive social norms that actually become structural barrier for girls? We are a grassroots organization, so we literally have foot soldiers, and we do work on the ground in a way. So I'm going to just try to see if I can oversimplify it for somebody who's not from our planet. So, number one, we identify communities that have data which is very, development data which is gender regressive. So we are looking at communities where high child marriage is very high, school dropout girls is very high, and some of these very, very clear indicators which we pick up from the government secondary data. Once we have identified the communities, then we do a community mobilization work, because we realized that when we will start working with girls, two things. Number one, the change is not only her responsibility, so everybody needs to kind of get involved. So we campaign and we get the community along. But at the same time, we need the community along so that there's no potential backlash. Because every time you challenge any social norm in any society, there is a potential of doing backlash, and then the most vulnerable actually pays for it. And therefore, understanding and mapping who are the social actors in a community. It could be a teacher, democratically elected village head, government officials who are there on the ground, whose voice and power matters, and making sure that they're basically aligned to us and partners. So we basically prepare a ground in terms of the community. Once we've done that, I think the next step is to build a safe space for girls within the community, and then we mobilize all the girls. They come in this safe space on a weekly basis, which is where we deliver our Girl Icon program, which is a leadership development curriculum that we have actually developed. The idea of the curriculum is, again, to kind of start building from confidence to agency to resilience, but also looking at practicality to really understand and build that narrative for girls that I can, but also then create spaces for them to look at very real time skills. So something I'll give you a very small example around negotiation, which we see a very, very important skill altogether, right? So let's say we run a residential workshop, and A girl gets invited and she says, I want to go to the workshop. The cycle would be she'll go to the mother, say, I want to go to the workshop. The mother say, I'll talk to the dad. Or the dad says, you can't go to the workshop. And then the girl was like, she's going to stop eating. She'll be very cranky. There is this entire thing. But I think the idea would be to say, can we understand why the dad said no? Right? And a lot of time in communities that come from generations of marginalizations, both socially and economically, it comes from fear. For a father who's never left his own village, thinking of his 14-year-old to going to a city is a very far dream. Right? And I think that's what we want to do through our curriculum is going to stretch those boundaries of imagination, and creating spaces for girls to really understand what can happen, what is the world out there. I'm also very, I think, now looking back in that sense, very happy that our curriculum has been, we've gone through multiple evaluations from UC Berkeley, Michigan State. We've done a longitudinal study through Kantar, and we're really seeing how that makes a difference. Then the third piece comes into, right? Once we've built that confidence, we've built that a bit of an agency, we want girls to be more visible on the forefront in the community. So these girl groups starts looking at issues in their community that are structural barriers for them and start designing projects around it. The idea of the projects, frankly, is not to solve the problem. It has been an intergenerational problem. So, for example, child marriage, right? It's not going to solve because somebody does like in one go. But we want the girls to start having conversation about it. And the power of a 14-year-old girl who's never stepped out of her house is not allowed to speak in front of her father and brother, to then stand up in front of an entire village and talk about child marriage is I think beyond words to express, right? And we've seen even the communities get very excited about. And so we've seen girls doing street plays, seeing campaigns. Like in COVID, in the communities we work, the government data said that almost 57% girls who were already in school might not come back to school. And then so some of our girl leaders, they did literally like I love a football analogy of a man-to-man mapping, and they literally went door to door, identified every girl in their village who was in school, and then collectively they ensured that these girls go back to school. And there is that power of collectivization. So we call them social action projects, and they range from education to health to social norms, an issue that they think it affects them, and design a campaign or a solution around it. The other piece that we look at is we also acknowledge that the government is the biggest social service provider and has the resources to do this. So as we start forming the groups, parallelly we work with the government to make sure that social services, so for example, scholarships, in some cases ration, sanitary napkins, health supplements, anything that the government is or these communities are entitled to, they have access to it. So we work with this interdepartmental convergence kind of mechanism to build those pipelines. In the process, like the groups kind of build their own leader. We call her Girl Icon. The Girl Icons get continuous support to look at. The Girl Icons become Girl Icon alumni. They support the new Girl Icon. So it's an entire process that kind of goes around. But I think something I wanted to talk about a bit from what Neha's also said, right? Like once we've built that thing, we then look at partners to do forward linkages, because that's something that we don't do. And when I mean by forward linkages is like we look at partners who are providing vocational courses, partners that are working with like entrepreneurial education, college scholarships, anything that goes into the secondary post-class grade 12 or post-schooling bracket. And that's where we build a lot of forward linkages to do partnerships to look at it. The core of Milaan's work that we have seen is that by building these girl leaders, by showcasing the communities what is possible, and role modeling from a very, perspective, like I said, right? Like we built the first software engineer in the village. The villagers could not even think about saying like, there is an thing, because it's not just being a software engineer, right? Like she makes her first salary, she buys a motorbike, in this case I still remember, for her father. And so there's an exponent, like there's a circle that starts challenging that notion of saying a girl can do more than what a boy can do. Uh, you know, and we are seeing in the longitudinal study that we had done, which was a decade-long work, we've actually seen that child marriage was about 27% in the states we work. In the communities we work was less than 1%. We saw that school dropout ratio from 40% came down to about 15%. That basically means almost 85% girls in the communities we work were actually going to school. We've seen similarly indicators around health, around gender-based violence. And I think that's what gave us hope. We've also looked at these major components, and I think there is a bit of a change in terms of like how we used to deliver and how we're delivering now. Because after we did this, we worked on this program for about 10 years. We went through multiple evaluations. We know what was working. We said, can we scale this systematically? So now we've actually collaborated with the government in Uttar Pradesh, which is the largest state population wise in India. So to give you a sense, the state has about 220 million people. And some of the worst development indicators. So we worked with the government to identify 3 districts, and the government calls them as aspirational districts. And we said we're going to work with every girl in these 3 districts. So about 500,000 girls in these 3 districts. And I think that's the model we are now going with, saying, can we bring more population saturation models so that we can solve a slice of the problem and do this at scale? Our aspiration is to kind of work with around 2 million girls by 2030 in some of these most vulnerable development, like gender regressively development indicator districts in India, are very focused on the 2 states because almost 25% of the adolescent girls live in these 2 states in India, which is Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. So we're really going very surgical of saying, like, let's find the geographies where the development indicators are low. Let's work with every girl. Let's work with the government to make sure that there's the right kind of support system to move forward. I did say I'm going to simplify a bit, but I think I'm going to take that back.
Super inspiring as well. And I love the girl icon, girl boss names you guys have, and just the numbers and the reach. I'm still tempted to dive into this notion of the opportunity that's like, here's a job, here's a definite funded opportunity versus this softer skill set that's a sort of intangible thing. Because this is where my work is we use the performing arts with children, and then we track like what happens to your little girl's eye contact and her articulation and her projection and her posture, and together we have a little sum that kind of looks at that being the development of her overall confidence and 21st century skills, which interestingly, I also agree with what you said before, Neha, that those 21st century skills itself is entrepreneurial skills. And that's also future readiness and the future of work. So those things really do connect. And in my world, the modality is art. But I imagine you guys were knowing of each other, working similarly in many ways. What are your pressing questions or comments for one another as organizations?
I think I have a learning and both a question. Right? I think the biggest thing, I think what we take away from Milan and Girl Icon is the importance of community work, right? And we learned it down the line in our journey. We started more surgically focusing on the girl and then realized we have to involve the community because we said we want to work in education spaces. We did do out of school dropouts, all of that in India. And then we realized, oh my God, it's really difficult to get girls to come to a place like Dhirendra was talking, right? And we said, okay, we'll just go to school. So we cut our losses there. But in Africa, yeah, we do just work with amazing, trusted organizations who the community believes in, and these girls show up regularly. And then they love Girl Boss, so more of them show up. And then you have these facilitators calling us and saying, oh my God, all girls come regularly because they're having so much fun. And sometimes I'm like, what are they having fun doing? They're just calling themselves girl bosses. That's amazing to hear. Sometimes they're making merchandise for themselves. But I think the question I have, Dhirendra, is the work that y'all are doing is so foundational for Girl Boss to even start, right? And we've run into this problem so many times. We said we'll start at 8th grade, and we realized the girls aren't ready, the community isn't ready, the government isn't ready, partners aren't ready. And we said this both in Nepal, in India, in Kenya, in Rwanda. We said, let's start as early as 8th grade. And we realized most of the girls that we're trying to work with aren't even academically there, but they don't have that support. And that's a completely different ball game. If with Girl Boss, we're really focusing on what is that education to earning capacity, right? So it was too early for us. So it's almost like we need girl icon. My question is, what does Girl Icon imagine as an exit for their girls? What's the next step for a Girl Icon program, an ideal partner coming in? And you did allude to a forward linkage and whether market or educational linkage, but what does an exit for a girl look like? When do you say this girl has got everything that Girl Icon could have provided?
Thanks, Neha. I feel the foundation of the work is could be looked at from two lenses. I think one is from the girl lens, and I think from the girl lens there is this basic agency that we would kind of just look at. And at Milan, we're defining agency as one's ability to make or influence just critical decisions of their lives. And I think that's the foundation we're basically getting into of saying, can we do that? Can a girl, if she wants to not drop out, create a space to be able to influence her family around it? And there's a lot of personal decisions too, right? So age group we work is around 10 to 19, but I would say our sweet spot would be about 13 to 16. And I think that agency building is what we are continuously mapping of saying, how do you even build that basic foundation of a girl believing that she can actually make a decision for her own life and she don't have to like be, somebody else making her decision. I think through Milan's work, the foundation we are basically saying is how do we build agency? The two tangible indicators we track is how do we ensure she doesn't get married before the legal age of 18? How do we make sure she doesn't drop out of school? Simple. And I think once we graduate from school, our intervention in a way kind of like pauses. And that's where our partners and the forward linkages kind of comes into, right? Of saying like, how do you then kind of build, because we know in the journey she needs a lot of support, and Milan or any organization cannot do it all alone, and therefore looking at who else is doing what and how do you connect there. um, I think the second exit kind of a thing is for us is in the community, right? Like really kind of saying like, once we get a feel of saying, okay, we've this work in this community for 5 years and we get a good sense of saying like, you're not needed, like we know what you're talking about, and people know the fact that there is an importance to invest in girls' education and girls have the skills to kind of do this, and they could do this. Frankly, in communities, what we've seen is they had to kind of also pick up your like thing, what you're talking about from Africa. Like we had actually cases where the program ended, but the girls never told the family that the program ended so that they can still continue to come to that physical space in the village to meet. Because it's not just about learning, it's about connection. It's about just being there for each other to be heard. And like, I've gone on a visit. I'm like, oh, this program ended like a year ago. And they're like, oh, don't tell anybody. We still continue to do that. But I think there's that power of collectivization and safe spaces at the community level too. So in the community level, in terms of exit, means when these spaces becomes more sustainable, where you don't need a Milan facilitator to kind of like, chase people to say, you need to come for this workshop and we're going to take an attendance, and we don't need that, right? Like, and we say, okay, if you think this works for you, you take it forward. But in the forward linkages, I also wanted to specify that, there is this kind of like part with partnerships, but in some spaces, we've also gone very intentional to say like, okay, we would have to provide college scholarships to make sure that we are able to kind of build that narrative. So um, I think on an average, we do about 700 plus college scholarships every year in very specific target geographies to make sure that we are able to build those role models. Because I think in the narrative change programming, we would have to be alert about the fact that there could be a narrative where somebody can in the village can say, oh, these girls went to this program and then what happened? Like they're just there to still follow the regular. And therefore it was important to be very intentional to say, okay, we would pick up these some geographies and some things and build some structurally role models from like when it comes to specifically college education. We want more and more girls to go to college. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to comment on that a little bit. I think, Anike, even you're a gender expert here in the room, which is lovely, but this problem is so massive, right? There's a lot of undertones of, oh, we've spent the last 2 decades working on girls coming to school and life skills for girls and solving for that. But I don't think we realize the expanse of it. And I think there is such an urgent need for more coalitions, more collaboratives, for organizations. At least Girl Icon and Girl Boss can combine forces, but a lot more people are coming together to look at the entire journey and what does that look like. Because for me to complete the economic piece, it needs everything before that, from community mobilization to confidence at a very, for a 10-year-old girl, what does confidence look like? Then what does it look like at eighth grade to not drop out of school and then do this? So it's almost like I'm almost pressing everyone listening to us right now to just reiterate the power of collaboration, and especially in the gender space. Definitely is a journey from where Girl Icon begins and ends to where Girl Boss picks up and all the other gender programs.
For me, I would even go as far as to say, Neha, I mean, it starts at birth. It starts when life begins, the relationship to self and confidence and self-worth and community and the ability to speak up. And so maybe, where my work is even pre where programs like yours and then Dhirendra's picks up. And so it's a beautiful chain, and it just proves how there is a ecosystem and a network out there in the world that can almost support each other. I am terrified to say we are out of time. So I would just like to end and ask both of you to answer a quick last question. We usually ask all our guests to just share with us their dream for education in the world. And in this case, I'm going to tweak it slightly and say your dream for every girl in the world.
Thanks, Annika. My dream would be for every girl in the world to be educated, healthy, and safe. I think these are fundamentals, and I just want to make sure that nobody's left behind, and build these three critical of education, educated, healthy, and safe as the foundation for anything else that could be built on from there.
Neha, for you?
Yeah.
Thank you,
I
Dhirendra.
have a theme statement and I have a visualization, but I'll stay true to my brand of launch girls. And I think the dream I have is that education is a launch pad and not a finish line for every single girl. And that what that looks like is skills, agency, and self belief that we spoke about are valued just as much as academic grades, right? Girls are able to learn to make decisions, negotiate, and lead no matter where they are, where they come from. And that education systems are designed for girls and boys, and sensitized again wherever they are in the world. I really want to be able to see women entrepreneurs, women and families depending on their women's salaries and involving them in decision making, and girls, no matter what age, as young or as old, being able to live lives of their choice.
It's a sad thing that we have to be reminded that the world still is not equal for women and especially young girls. But thank you both for reminding us of that today and for sharing in such beautiful detail what you do. We hope that you'll just go from strength to strength. And thank you for your time and for everyone joining us today.
The 100 Connected podcast is a creation of the Connection Committee, Netta Tachaf, Sherelle Tropers, Hanika Mackey, and Lindsay Stewart, and is produced by 100 and edited by me, Alex Shapiro. Learn more about 100, its innovations, and our community by visiting our website at 100.org.